a lot of the students that I work with that are in academic trouble, say we get them, second or third semester, 90% of those students didn't use the accommodations that were granted to them throughout their whole life.
Welcome to Talking About Kids. I am your host, R. Bradley Snyder, researcher, activist, and author of The 5 Simple Truths of Raising Kids. The challenges of transitioning from high school to college are difficult for everyone. But for neurodivergent kids, these challenges can be overwhelming. My guest this episode is Tara Williams, owner and founder of Innovative Collegiate Consultants. As you will hear, Tara believes that by selecting the right school, connecting with the right services, and getting the right executive function coaching, neurodivergent students can do more than survive this transition. They can thrive in college. Talking About Kids is sponsored in part by the Arizona Department of Health Services Must Stop Bullying campaign through its Title V Maternal and Child Health Program. For more information, go to muststopbullying.org. If you think the information in this episode might help a neurodivergent student in your life, well, please like this episode and then share it. And now, the interview.
So I started teaching at 22, and when I was teaching students who were either barely younger than me or students who were my parents' age, maybe going back to school for nursing or a trade. And just those two blocks of people have very different learning needs, right? We even think about how much math has changed in the way we teach it in the last 20 years. So working with those different groups of students really told me that I need to learn how to teach differently to reach everybody, especially something like being a chemistry professor, right? Or teaching people something that they can't see. And at the time, it was the 2005, so we didn't have all the visuals that we have now. So for some students, they needed to hear about it. Other students, we needed to have examples, like I use cooking or beer brewing or anything that I could think of, to help students realize what I was talking about, because we're talking about atoms that we know are there, but we can't see. Right. So after that, I went on to my doctorate in England, and then I was teaching an international students program from students all over the world. So now we're talking about, we have all of these cultural differences in the way that they were taught. And so I think I just really learned how to teach different people in different ways. And when I left my PhD, neurodiversity and the idea of things like autism and ADHD were really gaining a lot of, traction in the media and in the public. So I sort of started realizing, wow, like everything I've been doing really is like universal design. So it'll work well for students with learning difficulties, and it'll just work well for everyone. So once I started learning about neurodivergence, I really wanted to help those students who are really struggling in classes, mainly due to their executive function, not due to anything they were learning, but the fact that they were really struggling with planning and organization and time management. So I also then learned about accommodations as I became a professor. So just learning about students and their needs really led me to want to help them.
You said a lot right there. And so I want to back up just a little bit and define some things. And I believe that, longtime listeners of Talking About Kids have heard the term neurodivergence a lot. But to your point, it's being used more and more. When you say neurodivergence, or when you use that term in your profession, what do you mean by it?
So for me, I think about it as just, your brain works differently, right? Not necessarily wrong or bad, but just differently. And if you are neurodivergent, of course, that encompasses ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia. And with that comes those executive functioning issues, but also comes like the greatness of hyperfocus sometimes, and artistic thinking and creative thinking. So when I'm thinking about neurodivergence, I'm really just thinking about your brain doesn't work in the typical way that we think it does.
And so you've also mentioned executive functioning, and you've defined it there. And again, listeners will have heard other people talk about executive functioning and that prefrontal cortex. But can you just quickly talk about how it affects a college-bound student, that executive functioning?
Well, I think there's two pieces to that, right? So if you are going from high school to college, most likely, if you've had neurodivergence, you have an IEP.
Right.
But your parents and teachers are really handling that IEP for you and helping you. Probably they set your meeting, you have it once a year, your teachers know about it, maybe they've known you a long time, right? And when you get to college, you are now doing all of that for yourself. So you have to sign up for your accommodations yourself, you have to manage them yourself. And what does that look like? So, in terms of, let's just talk about testing. Depending on the school and how big the testing center is, like one of the schools that we work with the students, they have to schedule their final exams a month in advance. So if you're struggling with executive functioning, then you thinking about what's happening in a month is difficult. Like, I don't know about you, but me struggling for what's happening in a month is
Yeah.
difficult at this point,
Yeah.
right? So these students also are now having to self-identify to both, accessibility office and to their professors and say, here's my letter. I have these issues with executive functioning, or I need these things, right? Not a want, but I need these things to be successful. And that's very difficult, I think, as a young adult going to college. Also, I always say college is a social experiment. So you're learning all of these things. You're having this huge transition. So maybe you've gone with living with no one to living in a room with 3 people, right? So there's just so many different things happening at once. You trying to find a place to study, right? All of these things are happening, and having to learn how to self-advocate and self-identify is difficult for students.
Well, I think that even that term accommodations can be tricky, and how universities sort of place accommodations. So, in my experience, an office of accommodations at a typical college or university exist to accommodate a whole range of special needs that students might have. And tell me how you help the families and students with neurodivergence access an office of accommodation when the perception might be, boy, this is for people that have mobility issues or that have sight issues or hearing issues.
I think the first thing is talking to the parents and students and just saying, hey, you've always used this, right? Or you've always had it, right? And going, once again, the huge social and emotional and academic transition to college, not signing up for it to me is a mistake, right? So to having that talk with the student and say, hey, let's just sign up for it. What if you never use it, but you're signed up for it, right? And then and also telling them, like, there's a lot of students who use these on campus, right? You don't necessarily have to tell your friends that you're using accommodations, right? If you're taking your test elsewhere, that's fine. We'll deal with that when we deal with that. But the importance of having them if you need them, having access to them, maybe if you've always had a quiet room or if you've always had additional time or a note taker, whatever's offered to you, not to me, like not using it has not been successful. A lot of the students that I work with that are in academic trouble, say we get them, second or third semester, 90% of those students didn't use the accommodations that were granted to them throughout their whole life. And they were just kind of like, I don't think I need them, when they obviously have a need for them.
You've made the parallel that accommodations in a college or university setting is analogous to an IEP in a high school or grade school setting. And that makes me think about a couple of things about the IEP. Number one, when you create an IEP, you have a whole history of how the student has been performing in that space oftentimes, right? So you know from their previous year or maybe many years exactly how their neurodivergence is manifesting and the kind of things that support them and help them thrive. You don't always know that, though, when you're going into a college, because it is a very different environment, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Very different. And in terms of, once again, you haven't built those relationships.
Right.
Professors are new, and maybe you have one semester and you never see that professor again.
Yeah.
Right. So that's really also the difference in using something like an IEP and then having your accommodations in college, because there's only things that are a couple of things that are granted to you based on sort of
Right.
your testing, right? So that is also very different, and also having that discussion with parents sometimes is a little difficult as well. Hey, all of these things that were offered may not be offered when you're in higher ed. It's a different
Yeah.
realm, it's professorial discretion. So, also having that conversation before we even get started and asking, saying, hey, we can always ask for more things. They can always say no, but make sure and ask. But also know that maybe some of the leniency that they were granted in high school will not be granted in higher ed.
And your recommendation, it sounds like, is go for everything that you're entitled to, and don't worry if you're not going to use those things. Is that right?
Yeah,
Or does that create its own right?
yeah, and that's my suggestion, right? And
Mm-hmm.
once again, it's very, what you're entitled to is cut down a lot when you're in higher ed. So most of the things that are granted are definitely the extra time on exams, a quiet room, and note takers.
Okay.
Sometimes the college will let you register early, so having early
Mm-hmm.
registration. Sometimes, depending on the diagnosis, you can have preferential seating. Sometimes you can have, depending on the diagnosis, getting up and going out of the room for a few minutes, right?
Okay.
But a lot of things that professors might do for you might just be from a private conversation with a professor. Like, hey, I have a lot of anxiety. Like, if
Right.
I have a assignment that I need to turn in late for my own mental health, as long as I email you beforehand, can we have that conversation? Things like that. It might be a professor student conversation rather than a documented accommodation.
That seems frustrating to me, and let me explain why. If I am a student that and there's I'm more familiar with some neurodivergence than others, but a lot of neurodivergence is exacerbated by anxiety and
Mm-hmm.
pressure. And we also know that there is a tremendous amount of overlap between some executive function issues and social skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is one of them. So the idea that you're asking a young person to explain their preferences or needs to a professor who does not necessarily seem like a safe person
Mm-hmm.
all the time to talk to, it, is there an accommodation where the office of accommodations does the explaining for the student, or is the burden always on the student?
That's a good question. I've never had an accessibility office offer to do that, but they
Yeah.
are really great about communicating with professors. So that
Okay.
probably is an option. Because I have worked with some students who maybe the professors didn't understand the accommodation, or
Yeah.
quite honestly, maybe just didn't want to give it. So
Mm-hmm.
then helping the student advocate for themselves is always what we try to do. But then if that's not working, talking to accessibility and sort of sending them the emails or tell them what's happening and be like, how can you help me advocate because this isn't working?
Yeah, I bring that up because I actually had this conversation with a college professor recently where they had received kind of a roster. The students had self-identified. It was part of the registration process. And this professor had a student in their class. And the professor was struggling with how to accommodate the student because the student's behaviors were potentially disruptive of other students. And so the professor asked me, is this an issue I bring up with the student, or is this an issue I bring up with the Office of Accommodations? I want to be better at helping the student thrive. So to whom do I bring that question?
So yes, I would set up a meeting between both. So I would have
Okay.
the Office of Accessibility, as a professor, I would email the Office of Accessibility, sort of tell them the issues that I was having and see if they could set up a meeting with all of us in order to discuss some possible ways as a professor for me to do my best in the classroom and to have them help also explain to the students sort of what we were looking at.
And, Tara, you're the founder of Innovative Collegiate Consultants. And one of the things a service that you provide or that your firm provides is helping students match with colleges that might be able to help them thrive. That implies to me that colleges and universities, some do this better than others. Is that right?
I mean, I would say some have better resources than others.
Okay.
And also, just like as we were talking about professors, I think something for everyone to remember is that we are subject matter experts, right? I have a PhD in chemistry, and besides my teaching, which a lot of PhD programs don't offer, mine was a fully funded PhD. So therefore, I got a lot of teaching experience. But as a professor, a lot of people don't get teaching experience.
Okay.
Therefore, you're just supposed to be great in your area. We don't get all the great things from K 12. So I
Right.
also think professional development is so important, right? So just adding that in, sometimes giving us a little leniency in that we don't know the best way. Because unless you go and have access to all these professional development things, you may not know. Go ahead.
Yeah, but no. I'm gonna go back to my original question. It seems like you're being a little diplomatic here. Are there colleges and universities that are better at supporting neurodivergent
Yes, yes. The
students
answer
than
to that is
others?
yes.
Okay.
I mean, there are some
Okay.
colleges. I was just adding that in about the professors, but yeah, there are some colleges that are focused on neurodivergent students. Something like a Beacon College, right?
Okay.
And then other programs have a lot of great summer transitioning or bridge programs,
Mm-hmm.
especially for students with autism. So those are great programs just to know about. So the student can go maybe as a rising senior, so before senior year, or they can go early and sort of get the lay of the land. You learn the campus, you learn how to, where the laundry is and how to go to the lunchroom, and you're usually with those students, right? Other students that have autism are in your group. So those colleges, I think the bridge programs are popping up more and more. So I would also, there are some camps that do the same thing. They are on a college campus for the summer before and sort of give students a taste of what college life is like. Maybe even take a course. Doesn't count against them, but this is what being in the classroom is like. So I would definitely say, if you're looking for something like that, then there are a lot of colleges that have great bridge programs. Or there are a lot of schools that also have their sort of what I do as like personalized executive functioning built in their
Mm-hmm.
tuition. So looking for something like that as well.
I want to turn to the executive coaching in just a moment, but I know from talking to other professionals that evaluate schools or that evaluate juvenile prisons or that evaluate hospitals. There's like a rule of thumb. The better ones with the most experience can walk into a space and they'll know pretty quickly if they're in a space that's healthy or a space that needs help. When you are looking, because there are so many colleges and universities in the United States, and not to mention the rest of the world, when you are trying to figure out, well, is this one that I should explore more? Are there some like hallmarks, some little things that you look for in their materials that tells you, yeah, maybe this is one that's going to support neurodivergent kids?
I mean, for most of the schools that I meet with, if I meet somebody at a conference, I try to set up a
Hmm.
meeting and I meet with the person. So whoever
Okay,
runs whatever their program is. So I would say looking for schools that do have a bridge program or something
got
that
it.
is built in their tuition for students with autism, something that's built in there for students with ADHD, or maybe, right, that the program also supports AUHD, so autism and ADHD, right? That's what I would look for. I also, in my experience, students that have neurodivergence and have an issue sort of self-advocating, a smaller
Hmm.
school, right? It's less, it's, sort of easier to be able to have a conversation with your professor. You're not one of 20,000 kids, right? The other problem with accessibility offices is that there are a lot of students for each person. So
Hmm.
that tends to be, a case management, and accessibility does an amazing job, but there's a lot of students for each person. So for me, smaller campuses, and also once where you're sort of interested, have that conversation. When you're visiting campuses, go to the Office of Accessibility and sort of say, hey, I'm really interested in what your programs are. Can you explain further?
Absolutely. So going back to this idea of executive functioning coach, what is an executive functioning coach?
So I mean, I think it's a hot topic now, right? Executive functioning.
Okay.
I feel like
Yeah.
I see it everywhere, and I'm like, oh, because I've been doing this in academia for so long. So in terms of executive functioning, like we really focus on the academic piece. So
Hmm.
basically, we do what accessibility does. We just have a one-on-one approach because we can do that, right? And very personalized. So we help students once again with those accommodations, get them signed up early because sometimes if you're not if you once again if you know where your student is going to college, make that appointment in the summer. If you wait and make it in August, maybe you don't get in till October. Therefore, you're
Mm.
taking all of your exams and all of your first sort of big things without your accommodations. So we help with that piece and then help them manage it throughout the year. Oh, you have a test coming up in 2 weeks. Are you already registered for your testing center? Things like that. Sort of help them. Are you using a note taker? Let's organize your notes, right? Going on their learning management system, going on their email, right? Also, now with learning management systems, even something amazing like Canvas, right? We have professors who are emailing assignments, we have the syllabus, we have Canvas, and oh, let's have a Google shell inside. So now
Yeah.
we're looking at 4 places, right? I would struggle with that.
Hmm.
So working with those students, hey, let's check all of these things. Let's go through, once again, let's go through your syllabi. Let's make your appointments. And then we sort of help them on anything else, right? Like a lot of students with neurodivergence really struggle getting started. So, oh, you have this huge paper. Let's open a sort of Google Doc. Let's chunk the information question by question so you can work with it easier, right? Body doubling is so big. I don't know if you've heard that term.
No, tell me about body
So,
doubling.
body doubling is basically working alongside another person to get stuff done rather than sitting by yourself.
Okay.
I was reading this article about how adults are doing this. Sort of,
Mm.
you have been putting off making your doctor's appointment. I haven't made my passport. Someone else hasn't made their insurance. And there are now adults having parties to get things done because body doubling works so well. If we're all sitting together, we can focus on that one thing we've been dreading. So, same thing with students. That's why going to a coffee shop where other
Mm.
people are working works so well. Going to the library, right? I'm not sure if you did that when you were in school, but I did. I was like, oh, these other people are working. I need to be working, right? Rather than being alone and sort of being isolated, which I think we've seen a huge surge in that. We know that we're lacking community. So I would say studying with another person, or even one of my former students just would make her one of her friends sit in her room while she was folding her laundry because she got more things done when there's someone else in the room, even just talking to her. So that's what we refer to as body doubling. So sometimes when we're working with the students, that's exactly what we're doing. We're just body doubling. We're helping them along, but they're typing, they're getting started. So chunking information, body doubling with them, finding resources on campus,
Right.
finding their people. What clubs can you go to, right? Trying to work on that social piece as well. So we sort of, run the gambit. We help them with registration. So, hey, like maybe testing isn't your forte, right? So if this class, if we can help it, if this class only has 2 exams, maybe we can take another section where you can really show yourself in a group
Mm.
project or something like that. Or if you have a class at 8 a.m., most students don't go to class at 8 a.m. So
Yeah.
that class at 8 a.m., let's not have one at 7 p.m. because that's a very long day, right? Things that I don't think students think about when they're going into college. They're so excited. And also the free time piece. There's so much free time that they've never had before. And then how do they fill that up in the appropriate way and still get things done? And of course, enjoy their college experience.
And I do want to make a plug. I have met some wonderful college staff that were able to do this for their students, that were in those offices of accommodation and or accessibility services. And they knew they could interview a student and they could say, let's look at taking an English section with this professor
Mm-hmm.
because this professor does X, Y, and Z. So there's some professionals in all of these colleges and universities that kind of have in their brain an encyclopedia about which classes and which programs work for which kind of students. But then I'm also going to complain. I'm going to complain about professors a little bit here for a second. And, Tara, most of my friends are professors. And so I'm complaining about them. And I'm not saying anything that I wouldn't say to their face.
Mm-hmm.
But use the tools like Canvas the same way that everybody is using them.
Mm-hmm.
Do it the way that your university prescribes because it's so hard for students to go from this class where everything is in whatever system they're using for learning management, and then the professor in the next class does it completely differently. Their syllabus is not online. Their syllabus is a piece of paper, or their syllabus is a Google Doc. It's not loaded into Canvas. So, I mean, professors need to do a little bit of their own. And I know it's scary. Change is hard, but you're expecting your students to follow the rules. Sometimes you need to do that too. Just going to say that to the
No, I totally
professors
agree.
listening.
I totally agree. It's
Yep.
the same conversation. Like, I'm super interested in doing professional development for that reason,
Yeah.
right? And I teach in STEM, which is very important to be organized, right? Like, we
Yeah.
are very regimented. We have to get through a certain amount of material at a certain time. And little thing is just like, write your agenda on the board for the day, right?
Yeah.
When you say things, a lot of times students, all students, but especially those with neurodivergence, maybe that doesn't register. So how hard is it for us to write and take 5 minutes and write our agenda on the board, right? Or I sort of say constantly checking in. Hey, do we understand what's going on? Are we good? Right? Can I explain it in another way? Just any kind of professional development that we can do just to sort of work with all learners is super important. And there are definitely some professors who don't even use a learning management system. And then,
Yeah.
like you said, once again, also that's really hard. I'm just going to complain for 1 second too.
Yeah, please.
When professors don't grade things in a timely manner, because then students have no idea where they're at. And then we're sitting at week 8 and then they find out they're failing because they get one big assignment back that hasn't been graded. And that's really frustrating. That's really hard because we didn't really know there was a problem, and now there's a big problem.
Now
And
there's
how
a
did
big
they get up
problem.
that hill? So grading is super important, and it is very time consuming, and I totally understand that. But it is very important for students to know where they're at.
So, Tara, not everybody is going to have access to you and Innovative Collegiate Consultants. And something that I ask people that have these wonderful services is, if I can't access you, so I'm looking for somebody in my community that does it, especially with something that's exploding like executive functioning coaching. What should I look for? How do I know that I am finding somebody that has the right skill set?
I mean, I would see this sort of like I would see finding a good therapist, right? So finding someone that you match well with, always meeting with somebody in advance, right? And just sort of seeing is, within the first, I feel like we know within the first week or two whether something is working. So I would say also that's a great tool to learn how to self-advocate and be like, hey, this isn't working for me. So, this, whatever we're doing is not working. So how can we change that? And if it doesn't work, go to someone else, right? There are also a lot of online tools. There are lots of, tips that are online. There's a lot of great sort of social media stuff that is out there for executive functioning as well for a more, affordable version.
Yeah, but then there's also in that same space all of this junk science, and there's panaceas and easy fixes. And so how do you tell the difference between the snake oil that's being sold out there, especially to parents of children with autism, and actual actionable healthy approaches?
I mean, I would stay within the academics, obviously,
Okay.
right? In terms of knowing, sort of, like I said, most executive functioning is organization, planning, time management.
Okay.
So if we're going outside that realm and we're recommending things that are not inside that realm, I would probably just stick to that because we know that that works, right? We know that time blocking works. We know that chunking assignments works. We know that planning ahead works. So I would say start with that, and anything outside that realm, I wouldn't be doing as an executive functioning coach. Then there's other people that can sort of help in the therapeutic realm or things like that, right? We don't ever sort of blur those lines because we're not therapists. We're executive functioning coaches that are happy to work with therapists, right? And sort of see what's been working for the students. But I would say making sure that whoever you're working with is not blurring that line.
One of the things that you talk about in your materials is helping parents to not do everything for their kid. right? That's a big ask. On the dark side of this, I know that there are, relationships that have, marriages and partnerships that have dissolved because the amount of work that went into raising a neurodivergent child, right? So, and it takes a lot of time, or can take a lot of time, but as you point out, that has to stop at some point, and the now young adult has to do some of this for themselves, or they're not going to have their own relationship, their own success, their own lives. What do you tell parents to help them pull back?
I mean, obviously, this is not going to happen overnight, right?
No.
And I would say starting as young as you can. And obviously, something like autism, that's a big spectrum. That's going to have a lot of different sort of needs, right? But in general, if you know that your student is sort of college bound, right? Maybe by middle or high school, like learning that self-advocation piece, right? So maybe if there's a problem with the teacher, helping them write an email, right? So how can I help you learn how to do this? We do this with our own university students. I know, as you were saying, it's not easy, like the easiest conversation to have, right? So helping them write an email so that then they can go talk to the teacher, right, in high school. So sort of being able to do that, right? Or saying, hey, this isn't working for me. I really need this. And that is so hard, and I totally understand that. But learning that advocation piece, or at least getting them to try, so that when they're older, they can really be able to at least try to do it themselves. Even if they still need help, they've learned how to do that, right? I often say, like, my first month of college was a long time ago. It was in 2000. And like, I remember I'm from a very small town in Florida, and I went to Florida State, and I lost my car at the stadium when I went to the register. And I called my mom, and she was like, Tara, like, I am 5 hours away. I have no idea where your car is, but let's see who we can find to help you find your car, right? And like, I use that as a great example, right? My mom was there for me, and she was like, let's figure out how you're gonna do this, but I can't do it for you. Like, even then physically she couldn't. I know that's very different now. But at the same time, like, giving me the tool and the confidence to be like, okay, I can do this. I just gotta find someone and admit that I lost my car, right? So I think that is such a good analogy of trying to give them the tools. And then if it's not working, then stepping in again, right? And then maybe trying again. And maybe it's a different teacher, a different perspective. We step in a little less, right? That's what we work with our students, with helping them advocate in the emails. And then maybe by the next year, I'm like, hey, you missed that assignment. I already emailed my professor. And I'm like, amazing, right? So just sort of the same thing, right? Stepping in, giving them a little space, stepping back out. But helping them write the email, or sitting there why they write the email, most important piece. Because if not, they're probably not going to write that email, because self-advocation is scary, right? None of us like to do that. So that's what I would say, is just to step in and help when needed, and then step out, give them some space, see what they do on their own.
For those parents out there that have, maybe a senior or a junior in high school, and they are tired, and they are thinking, oh my God, now they're going to go to college, or should they even go to college? And what is, and I'm at, do you share a success story, somebody that you've worked with that made it through college, and is now, living their best life?
I mean, I have so many. Let's see. Probably one of my favorites is a student that I worked with who has started college during COVID. So everything was online, and he was a computer science major. And when I had gotten to him, maybe third semester, right, he was failing out. He's on academic probation. And having the conversation of, do you really want to do computer science? Is this what you really want to do? Or is this something that you thought you wanted to do? Or, I mean, that's happening more and more, right? We have to identify a major before we even go. And how do we even know what we want to do at that age? I changed my major like 7 times. So for him, having that conversation and being like, if you want to fight for this, let's see what we can do. But he was like, I don't want to fight for this. And I said, okay. So we changed his major to business administration. we got all of his he signed up for all of his accommodations. So he started using at least the note takers, and then slowly, if I need it on the exam, I will. Sometimes I like to take it in the class. Sure.
Yeah.
And even that semester, he did really well, but maybe like a 1.9, and he had to get a 2.0 to stay. So they were going to release him, and then we wrote an appeal. Hey, he's doing all this. It went up so much. He got to stay. And then by his last year, he applied to law school. And so saw such a huge, once he had the confidence and the change in major, saw such a huge increase in everything. So he ended up getting an informatics. So you also use those computer science credits, so they didn't go to nothing, right? In his mind, nothing. So he had that as a minor. He went to law school, and because of his grades earlier, his first year, he's like, Tara, I really think I can get in a better law school. Applied the second year, got into a law school that he was more excited about, and now he is studying cyber law in his third year at a law school. So
that is a great story.
Yeah.
So there's hope for all of us out there. And Tara, I just want to thank you so much for everything that you are doing for these kids. And thank you for being a guest on Talking About Kids.
Thank you for having me.
That was Tara Williams. More information about Tara and Innovative Collegiate Consultants is at talkingaboutkids.com. And when you do visit the Talking About Kids website, leave me a note. I would love to hear from you. The Talking About Kids theme song is by the Senators. For more of their music, go to thesenatorsmusic.com. And remember, kids are young goats and young humans. And the difference is that young goats are easier to manage.